So aside from the DeMar DeRozan impending free agency and whether the Bulls choose to extend him or not to keep him on this roster going into next season, the other major focal point of the offseason for the Bulls is whether or not they're going to be able to trade Zach Lavine. Because without trading Zach Lavine, and if they keep DeMar, which they have indicated they want to do, they're not going to see much change to this roster. It's financially impossible to be able to do so if you extend DeMar to a large contract and you're also unable to get off Zach's contract. They will be an over-the-cap team and near the tax line if they go this route. And as multiple Bulls insiders have confirmed, including Casey Johnson, the main focal point of this offseason is to trade Zach Lavine. They are very motivated to get that done. Now, you can argue whether it makes sense to trade Lavine versus keeping DeMar, but at the end of the day, that's what the organization is focused on. And it dates back to the beginning of last season when it was announced that both sides are going to be heading in a different direction. And when that comes out, it's kind of hard to go back from that. But the biggest question, though, is what is going to be the market for Zach Lavine this offseason, given there was little to no interest in Zach during the season last year, in which the Bulls were unable to move him prior to the trade deadline. What is a realistic trade package the Bulls could obtain for a player on a max contract who had a subpar season when he played and coming off a season-ending injury and hasn't played since that injury? Well, in this video, we're going to try and assess the trade value for Zach Lavine and look at trade packages we need to see, ideal packages but realistic ones, in exchange for Zach before heading into training camp. And I would love to hear some of your guys' trade proposals in the comments for Zach Lavine. So what's going on, everyone? You're listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Real quick, be sure to check out our sponsor, Underdog Fantasy, if you haven't already. They're matching deposits up to $100 for first-time depositors. Free money, might as well take it. It's also a great platform for fantasy sports and player prop betting. My personal favorite that I use on the app is NBA Pick'ems. You can pick higher or lower on most player stats and win up to 100 times your money in a single night. Yes, they're upping it from the previous 20 times your money. So if you're interested, link to the site and the promo code to get your first deposit doubled is in the description as well as in the pinned comment. Now, when talking about trades for Zach Lavine, a lot of it is assessing what are the teams that are in need for a player like Zach. A team that needs an efficient scorer, needs athleticism, shooting, but also a team that fits their overall timeline, given Zach is going to be turning 30 years old next season. The other thing to consider here, and maybe to a lesser degree, is looking at teams that have cap space, which aren't very many going into this offseason, but the reason that's important for the Bulls anyway, and that benefits them greatly, is it enables them to trade Zach Lavine and take in much less salary in return. Because unlike in-season trades where you have to come close to matching salaries in a given deal, during the offseason, teams that have cap space can absorb his salary using their cap space and won't be required to send out the same outgoing salary, which gives the Bulls more flexibility on their own cap sheet and staying under the tax, which they're going to need to do if they intend to extend DeMar DeRozan. So there are a few teams as of right now that I think could be suitors for Lavine. Now, I'm doing this in early May. Obviously, so much can change between now and the official end of the NBA season after a team is crowned the champions. And I'll likely have to do an updated ideal trades video for Zach as we get closer to the draft, because depending on how teams perform for the rest of the playoffs, those that fall short of expectations and get a little more desperate, that will impact what Zach's trade market could look like from where it is today. So just throwing that out there is something to keep in mind. His trade market or his value is going to be fluid as we go through the playoffs and teams start getting eliminated. So enough rambling. Let's open up the old trade machine. Haven't looked at it in a while since the trade deadline and go through some potential trades that would be successful. And look, as I was going through these, I realized there are really endless amounts of different combinations that can be had in terms of the number of trade packages that could work. And obviously, this is also highly dependent on the direction the Bulls take and what their ultimate goal is on whether to rebuild, retool, or keep trying to stay competitive. So I'll explain my rationale for each trade package based on the approach of what it would mean for the Bulls' future. But most of these, because of AK's comments on the end of the season and what he wants to see in this team winning 10 more games on the year, I'm going in with the assumption that this team is still going to be trying to win now. So first up, I've got to start with the Sixers. And the main reason I'm looking at trades with the Sixers is, one, they have a ton of cap space going into next season, more cap space than any other team in the league. Yes, they're going to have to pay Maxey, like a max contract, but even with that, they still have space to be able to absorb Zach's deal. Now, for this one, the trade machine obviously can't predict what some of the Sixers free agents are going to end up getting in their next deal. For example, they have Maxey at a $13 million cap hold, which he's obviously going to get way more than that. You're looking at an annual salary that is probably going to be closer to $40 million. So So it's tough to say whether this trade would actually go through after Maxey gets paid, and it's possible the Bulls would have to take back slightly more in return than what you see here. But the reason for this trade where the Sixers would send the Bulls Paul Reed and 2 seconds is, first of all, the Sixers aren't going to send a first-round pick out for Zach Lavine. But the benefit for the Bulls in this trade is, one, they get off Zach's contract, which has proven to be a challenge, as evident from his trade market this past season. The Bulls need size. They get that with Reed, who can play the 4 or 5, which is something the Bulls are going to need even more, considering it's likely Andre Drummond doesn't come back. He's also young, only 24. I wouldn't say he has a ton of upside, but he actually had one of his best seasons since being drafted as a late second-round pick. In terms of his overall durability, offensive rebounding, that's great, something the Bulls also need. Also, from the Sixers' perspective, I mean, at the time we were recording this anyway, they're still in the playoffs, but one loss away from being eliminated in the first round. They're going to be desperate, more desperate than most teams, to try and make a big push to add offensive firepower, knowing they need to do whatever possible to keep Joel Embiid happy. I had another one with the Sixers as well. This time it's for Buddy Hield, which would be a sign-and trade because Hield is actually going to be a free agent. They have a cap hold on him for $28.9 million in the system based on what Hield earned last year, but he's not going to make that kind of money on the open market. Maybe the Bulls can get him on a short-term deal for around $15 million, which frees up a lot of cap space for the Bulls, given Zach is making over $43 million. And while Buddy Hield is already 31, and not really going to be part of the Bulls' long-term plans, he's one of the more lethal shooters in the NBA. He can be streaky at times, but he can get hot in a hurry, and we all know the Bulls still need shooting, outside shooting. And Hield can certainly space the floor and be a scoring spark off the bench or even in the starting lineup, since he would essentially be replacing Zach. Now, I know I'm going to get all kinds of hate for this one, but hear me out here. It's a trade with the Nets that includes Ben Simmons. Simmons, you guys know I was really high on and wanted the Bulls to trade for him back in the summer of 2021 when the Bulls needed a point guard badly before they signed Lonzo Ball, and I thought Simmons was just the needed person for a change of scene and would fit perfectly on the Bulls at that time because they needed defense and playmaking, and they wouldn't have to worry about Simmons' offense because they had Zach Lavine and Vucevic, who were coming off all-star seasons. But obviously, I didn't know that Simmons was going to be mentally weak and injury prone from that point forward and is more or less washed at this point. But the main reason for this one, the Bulls are taking on an expiring deal of Ben Simmons. This frees up cap space for the future where they don't have to pay Zach for the next 3 years. Maybe Simmons can be somewhat productive and give the Bulls some added defense, but regardless, it's one season, and then they don't have to worry about him beyond that. But also, the Bulls get a first-round pick out of it, taking Simmons off of the Nets' hands, an unprotected pick from the Phoenix Suns, which who knows, with the disaster that the Suns are right now, they could crash and burn and start rebuilding by 2027, and that pick suddenly looks very nice. And then for the Nets here, I mean, the way I look at it is they're trying to win. Yeah, they want to get younger and focus on their next chapter after the failed Big Three, but they're incentivized to win, given most of their picks that they owe are to the Houston Rockets. Tanking or losing in general doesn't benefit them when they don't control their own picks. So adding a player like Zach, even though, yes, I get that it conflicts with Bridges position-wise, but either of those guys can and have played the 3 in the past. So I feel like they could make it work and complement each other well. Now, this one I'm going to go through kind of quickly because I really don't see how Zach Lavine makes sense for the Pistons, but you keep hearing about the Pistons being the one interested team in Zach Lavine. Let me be clear, the Pistons are not going to give up Asar Thompson, Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren, or Cade Cunningham for Zach. That's not happening. But I guess if the Pistons really don't want to continue being the doormat of the league, then sure, they could try and make a play at Zach Lavine while his value is so low, and they can maybe win a few more games and have a veteran on the team in a sea of young guys. In this one, I included Evan Fournier, a team option expiring deal, so no harm really for the Bulls long term. And who knows, maybe Fournier can provide that extra shooting that they need. And then 2 second-round picks. Pistons aren't trading a first-round pick when they know that those are likely going to be high lottery picks given the team's history. This one is mainly good for the Bulls because the Pistons have cap space, again, absorb Zach's salary in a trade without the Bulls taking on in as much money. They would save $24 million this season and obviously going forward since it's an expiring contract of Evan Fournier. Now let's do a few Western Conference teams. Of course, we've got to start with the Lakers. A disappointing year for them. They know they have such a limited window of trying to win a championship, even though I think we all know it's not going to happen, but they could try and make a play at Zach, given they could use his shooting and scoring in general. For the record, I get that this trade is not ideal, and I personally want nothing to do with D'Angelo Russell on my team, which I should be clear, it's possible that he declines his player option and becomes a free agent, making this trade moot. But for now, he hasn't decided on that yet. and we can assume he picks it up. The benefit to the Bulls, it's an expiring deal. And if D'Angelo Russell can accept a role in coming off the bench to give the Bulls offense in the second unit as a floor spacer and scorer, then maybe it's not the worst thing in the world. We talked about how the Bulls had no depth this past season, especially with all the injuries. Having a guy like D'Lo coming off the bench who put up 18 points per game last season maybe isn't that bad of an idea. Gabe Vincent, I mean, that's almost the Bulls doing the Lakers a favor by taking on, his contract, getting that off their hands. Although if Vincent can stay healthy and be like he was in Miami, that's a different story and actually could work out for the Bulls. And then Jared Vanderbilt. I've always been high on Vanderbilt. I like his game. He hustles, plays good D, a versatile big. He's just been injured. But if he can stay healthy, he's only 25, on a fairly team-friendly contract, as long as he can get back to the player he was before his injury, and he gives the Bulls size and rim protection. And then obviously a second-round pick as well. In all these trades, if we're basing it off of the lack of interest in Zach Lavine, you have to view it in a sense that there are going to be teams wary of taking him on, and thus the Bulls either need to attach assets to move him in a deal or might have to take on not so favorable contracts. That's really just the reality of the situation. So finding the balance can be tricky, and in most of these, I don't have the Bulls attaching an asset because I don't see them doing that. They would probably just keep Zach at that point before including a first-round pick just to get off of his contract. Now, this next one is with the Kings, another team I think will be desperate this offseason after missing the playoffs when they just finished third last year and went to the playoffs for the first time in like 15 years. I think the Kings are likely going to lose Monk in free agency, so they're going to need a two-guard, one that can space the floor for Fox and be a second or third scoring option behind Fox and Sabonis. They're not going to be willing to give up their younger guys. And Barnes and Huerter had subpar seasons. Huerter is coming off an injury. I can see them doing this deal where they trade both of these guys for Zach. For the Bulls, the benefits on their side: one, they save $8.2 million on their cap sheet. They add size and shooting, two things they need if they are in fact going to move on from Zach. And then finally, I've got two with the Warriors. This first one is more or less salary dump. They bring in Chris Paul mainly just for coaching and mentorship purposes for guys like Coby and Io. Chris Paul is pretty washed, and I don't see him really being effective in an actual season, but it's an expiring contract, so there's value in moving Zach to get an expiring deal. Kevon Looney, also expiring, gives the Bulls a backup center, which they need. And then Saric, that would be a sign and trade, likely at the mid deal, also more size and some shooting. But the one I like even more, even though it pains me to include Alex Caruso, but with AC's contract expiring, he's going to be a free agent next summer. I have a hard time seeing him wanting to stick around with the Bulls if they can't even be a playoff team. And when his value is still very high, and we know the Warriors wanted him at the deadline, the Warriors also need defense, and who knows what the future of Klay Thompson is. I think they likely pass on re-signing him, so they're going to need another shooting guard, one that can operate in the catch and shoot, but also create his own shot. So for the Warriors, they could be motivated to take this type of deal and get it done, even though it includes two of their young prospects. I like this deal for the Bulls because, again, it gives them two expiring contracts and two young players. One I am very high on in Jonathan Kuminga. So this allows for the Bulls to add assets for their future with already Coby, Io, and Pat. And so while I don't like the idea of getting rid of AC, yeah, I would do this deal. So there you have it, some trade packages I would like to see the Bulls make for Zach Lavine. Let me know how you guys feel about some of these trades. Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.